Many of the others which I narrated were my personal experiences. But yes, I mean that is, how do you distinguish which particular approach at which particular situation? I would generally say that we should lay systems right. If the systems are right, and because systems can take time, but systems can be also done with thought, reflection, and we have a little time to do it. So lay the systems right, like you lay the road right. And then if there is a pothole on the road, you can fill up that particular pothole in a responsive way. So, but what happens is that since we have a vast population with increasing demands, with multiple pressures, we do responsive administration, what many of my colleagues call firefighting most of the time. We are putting out fires rather than preventing them. And so that can happen. Now, if there had been a culture in Muzaffarnagar where the parents were educated that the children should always go to bed with a meal, especially in lychee season when they are plucking it is actually fruit plucking season. They pluck the fruits and they eat some of them, which is why the sugar imbalance. Okay, so if the parents had been educated over years, then this wouldn't have happened. And India, we are also a society in transition. There was our age-old wisdom, what our grandmothers used to do, which we used to follow blindly. But today we don't have that old age wisdom anymore because many of us have moved away from our homes. My own family home is in another city altogether. I have moved here for my profession. I don't have the wealth of wisdom which my grandparents had or my ancestors had. But I also don't have access on a regular basis to medical systems. So it is neither this nor that in a transitional society. So in a general way, because for your question I can only give a generic reply, I would say that lay the systems right at first, because there you have the time. You do your awareness programs, you call women and mothers, educate them, you call parents, you have a neighborhood hospital system where the doctors or we have what is called the ASHA worker, the ASHA worker is a kind of informal nurse who visits homes. So you let them educate the parents, and then there will be even then there may be cases, but there will not be hundreds. There will be one or two outliers whom you can still deal with in a hospital. That is how I would look at the problem. That systems should be laid because you have the time to do them. Response, we don't usually have the time. So that time you be geared to react quickly. Keep the machine well oiled.
Thank you.
Satisfies? I don't know.
I just have a question regarding your trajectory as a woman in a culture that I think we come from different backgrounds and countries, but I think it's a challenge everywhere in our economies and countries. What are your lessons from thriving as female leader in this country, and maybe what can we take also with us to our home countries from your experience in this sense?
When you reach a certain level of authority, and my service gives me a lot of authority, gender ceases to matter, both to me and to others. Most days I say that we wear saris, as you can see. This is our formal wear. It's a very difficult dress to wear. And when I leave home, I stand in front of the mirror. I just see that this is in the right place and this is in the right place. And after that, I forget that I'm a woman. There are days and there are many days when the people around me, my subordinates, officers, my colleagues, also forget that I am a woman. Because we are all more oriented to the task. There are also days, and the best days are when they also forget that I am their boss. And I always come up with anecdotes because I've had a long career. There is this very interesting incident which happened. I have a very consultative way of working. So we have in India what is called the minimum support price procurement. I think somebody should brief them. Basically, the government every year purchases food grains from farmers at a preset price, and the price is determined by different factors: consumer price index, cost of fertilizer, all that, and we set a price. Let us say rice will be, or wheat will be purchased at 25 rupees a kg. Just a notional thing I'm telling you. Every year we purchase. And this is a big exercise, huge exercise, pan-Indian. So I was at that time the Secretary of the Food and Civil Supplies, so I was in charge of the procurement. And I have a table like this, and government is very scarcely provisioned, so one computer among 20 of us, and I and my subordinates all crowded around that one PC, not a laptop, the desktop, and we were preparing a note to present to the cabinet, which is also an annual exercise. That morning I could not have my breakfast. So we were sitting and writing about food, but my stomach was rumbling. And I kept interrupting this process, saying, it was getting late. So I said, let's break for lunch, we'll come back and do it. Because I was getting hungrier. But everybody around me, and they were all my subordinates, were so involved in the task. And it is a very interesting exercise, you get into it. And they were so involved in the task, they didn't want to stop. And one of my officers, and I still tease him about it, his name is Narendra, he said very abruptly, "Madam, if you are hungry, you go and have lunch. We'll finish the job." And he said that in Kannada. You go and have lunch if you like, we'll finish the job. At that time, barriers dissolved because the task becomes more important. But again, word of caution. In India, for every truth, the converse is also true. The reverse is also true. What is true of me with my position and my level of authority may not be true of a rural woman who has to work along with, in her own pressured environment, who may not be, it's especially not true of women who have migrated from rural into urban, and they are working as domestic servants, or they are working in some let us say public utility or a private utility somewhere. So this is the issue, that in India the diversity is so much. So both things may be true at the same time. What lessons can I say? I'm always nervous about having general principles that you can follow. But maybe you can say that if you have a support system at home, because we don't have many public support systems, we are only getting into the age of creatures and daycare. So if you have a support system, don't hesitate to ask for help. If you can cultivate and nurture sisterhood, which is very much absent in our country, region, language, caste, community matter more than gender. So if you are able to cultivate and nurture sisterhood, help someone, some other woman, please do. And generally, any kind of politics, and especially gender-based politics, I told you how my boss sent me off. He was hoping that I would get bashed up. It didn't happen. If you are a victim of that kind of treatment, simply ignore it. It passes off after some time. In terms of takeaway, that is all I can offer. It is so contextual.
Thanks.
Last table left.
Thank you. Very inspirational talk and inspiring.
Thank you.
Maybe I could ask you
Yes, please.
a last question. And again, I would say it's very inspiring in your career, and a value that I always see as central to great leadership, your humility.
so
in talking
that's
about
very
your
good.
leadership and your experience. Was moving to me. I wanted to ask, in a way, a broad question. You may just feel comfortable weighing in on part of it. We've been hearing so much about business leadership, and part of what over the last several decades, and I think it's especially relevant here in India amidst the extraordinary transitions that you described in part, is there's a tendency among practitioners and researchers on leadership to talk about traditional leadership versus something else, network leadership, social leadership, digital leadership, and so forth. And in listening particularly to your illuminating summary about the IAS and about the leadership and management that take place there, I couldn't help but wonder if the IAS is seen by many Indians as representing a kind of traditional approach to management. They may see it as bureaucratic. Obviously, you've really unpacked that for us, issues of consultation and kind of situational responsiveness. I guess I'm just wondering if you could speak generally about how you see the evolving IAS approach to leadership and management in comparison to some of what you also see maybe in the marketplace among business leaders, again at business schools, who are aspiring to be entrepreneurs or aspiring to be very successful in the marketplace. And what do you see as similar, and maybe what do you see as different between those different approaches to management and leadership?
I see an evolution even in this twin trajectory, if we picture it as such, that in the early days, business leadership in India was of two kinds, that one or two-pronged focus, that there would be a focus on profit making and there would be a focus on philanthropy. And philanthropic business leadership in India dates far before CSR became fashionable. With the Tatas, for example, the Birlas. It was a different kind of philanthropy, not the philanthropy which you see today, which will probably be more modern or environmentally oriented philanthropy, for example. But in our context, food, for example, or a place of religious worship, the Birlas excelled in constructing temples, which also became, which were also our places of social mingling. The Tatas did a lot of multi-level philanthropic work. The more modern industries which you see around you here, Infosys, they also now, they all start foundations, they fund educational institutions. But these are the twin-pronged focal points of business leadership. To that extent, it is more clear-cut, leadership in the business world. In the IAS and governance in general, and when I spoke of IAS because that was my area where I could speak best, but this is also true of political leadership in India, where there are virtually no boundaries. You can't say that I will look at environmental leadership or I will set up a school and there my social responsibility ends. Your social responsibility begins and ends where the people decide it wants to. If somebody comes to you saying, I want a school admission, you got to do it. If I was the Chief Executive Officer of Dharwad Zilla Panchayat, I don't know whether I mentioned, which is a district in the north of Karnataka. And I sent my people out to all the far-flung, a huge district, very large district. I sent my people out just to all the villages. What are the felt needs? And at that time, that was a term which we used in rural development. What are the felt needs of the population? And believe you me, almost every hamlet and village wanted a barber shop. They didn't have, they had to, walk miles or cycle miles in order to get a haircut. And the next biggest demand was a school. So we can't say that I will do this as my social responsibility. If my village wants a barber shop, that's what I need to deliver. And that the same goes for a local politician. This is, in terms of, orientation and the boundaries of or the pressures on leadership, this is what I see. But then there is something else which is happening. I told you we are generalists. Now, in India we have this very big, and it's there all over the world, the generalist-specialist debate. And as India became independent, IAS is older than Indian independence. We had the Indian Civil Service, which is actually a colonial institution. So it dates before 1947 when India became independent. But post-independence, we started setting up scientific institutions. We have in Bangalore the Indian Institute of Science. We have the Indian Institute of Technology nearby Chennai, Madras. We have Indian Institute of Management not very far from here. Then the specialists began to say that it is important to have specialists. And especially business schools became specialists in management, business management, which is not one subject, which also has its parts, but basically its orientation is to be a chief executive officer of a business organization. But increasingly I find, at least among the business leaders in India, and I have heard this echoed by at least some academics from the USA, that there needs to be a generalist orientation as well. You cannot be, for example, be a pure engineer and be a good leader.